Now, this is kind of two different ways of practicing, because one is, moving around, meandering, thinking of ideas, all these different things we've been talking about. Well, now what I'm trying to do is I'm using a bit of, again, what I call plotting points, which is really composition, but it's happening in real time. E over E, D over D, C over C, this is a logical connection that I would make, and then I'm going to keep building, but let's start with that. So I'm going to start this track again. Here we go. Okay, so hopefully you saw how I'm building just a little bit each time. I started off just playing those notes, and then I started maybe moving between them a little bit, right? That positional thing we talked about, playing notes differently. So instead of just playing this note, I bent to it, right? Some things like that. And then I started adding some flair, some color around, using some of being in time, free time, right? The connected time versus free time. This is all natural for me. This is how I play. So as I play, whatever it might be. Then I started using some chord fragments, double stops, if you will. And then I started doing these just whatever. Right, whatever. So right now, I'm just playing E and D and C. I'm building this small idea and then building around that, okay? So it gives me kind of a base to start from. Now, I don't always have to do that. It's not like I always have to make a connection to each chord every single time. Here's the big difference. If I never make the connection, my solo just sounds like I'm just all over the place. So this is where you got to be careful and you got to be honest with yourself. It's okay to go off. It's okay to go off and be, which I'll do next, okay? Not necessarily fast, but it might happen. I don't know what's going to happen. But to make that connection and then leave that chordal connection, but then to come back to that chordal connection in some capacity. Now, right now, we're just dealing with E and D and C, but that will change in a little bit here. So now what I'm going to do is start with that idea, and then I'm going to go off a little bit. Let me show you how that sounds as I do that, okay? Okay. So I'm going off, okay? Started with something, but then I started going off. And as I'm going off, sometimes I always call it tipping my hat. I'm not tipping my hat to each chord as they come by. I'm not obligated to do it every single time, but I am obligated to do it in some capacity because that's how melody is made, is to make some sort of a choral connection. Okay? If I never do it, it just sounds like I'm playing over there. I always tell people it's like driving down the interstate. There's two cars. You don't know anybody in the other car. You're driving, and then this car comes up. They're going to pass you, and they don't pass you. They're driving right next to you. And it becomes uncomfortable because you don't want to look at them. They don't want to look at you. And you're both coexisting in the same space in the world, but you're not existing together. They're having their own conversation, listening to their own music. God knows what's happening. You've got your own thing going on. You don't want your music to be like that all the time, right? Sometimes it happens where you kind of go outside and now you're working more on the lines of trying to create something with energy, whether it's speed, whether it's repetition, whether it's a bend. You know, if you go to that can be very, very, very powerful. There's a lot of energy because the pitch is really high, right? Different things like that. Where if I just did this the entire time for 3 minutes, it probably would get a little old after a while, okay? So it's okay to go. It's okay to leave and go let that energy flow, okay? Make that connection. But then while you're doing that, come back. And here's what works well for me is because I know my fretboard, because I know my chords, my theory. Again, I'm not saying that in a weird egotistical way. I'm saying I know how to play over E minor, D, and C. I've done it a million times. So as I'm playing, those chords are existing everywhere for me because I know like my cage system, if you're familiar with that. So as I'm playing and I think, okay, here comes the E, right? So I bend that note up. Okay, well, what do we have here? E, F, G, A, and I'm ending up bending up a whole step, so I'm bending to B, right? Well, if you know the notes of your chords, E minor is E, G, and B. Well, I'm bending to the B, right? And then when the next chord comes up, D, I bring this down, which means it's becoming A. Well, D has D, F sharp, and A. I hope I said E, G, and B. I think I did, but D has D, F sharp, and A. So I'm coming down to the A, okay? And then it moves down to the C, E, and G, so I have to figure out what I'm going to do. Well, again, this is all happening in real time. This is improvisation for me. I'm not sitting there I'm not overanalyzing any of this in real time. It just happens. This is how my brain works. Yours might be the same, yours might be different, and it's okay. I'm just telling you, this is what happens. So now here comes that C, so I think to myself, maybe I just drop down to the G, or maybe I'm going to do a lick because I need to change this up. I already spent time going. You see? So that lick takes me out of that high-pitched zone back into kind of a medium zone, right? And the lick gave it some energy that was a different kind of energy than it was when I was doing this. You see? So that's, again, it's always dynamic contrast. It's ebb and flow. That's what you're looking for, is just trying to find a way to make this interesting for the listener. So, I try and be careful with just doing. If you're a beginner and you've never done this before, that's a wonderful place to start. But you'll also notice I'm not just sitting here in this pentatonic position either, right? I've got to get out of that. That's where my creativity comes from, like I was telling you. If I'm working vertically, horizontally, or more kind of cutting through, which is the arpeggio ideas, which I haven't really done yet, but I would start adding this stuff in. I'd add those things in. And again, I'm not trying to just play fast. These are just things that I do as I play. Okay?